Hi guys, welcome to Broke Teachers Travel. I'm Marnie,
And I'm Jeff.
and today we are talking a little more about Jeff's adventure in Egypt. So you went to more than just Cairo.
Oh, yeah, I went all over Egypt, and there's still a lot of places I would like to go, but, it was a cool adventure.
So after Cairo, did you head, which direction did you head?
All right, we started in Cairo and started going south, so that's kind of what was going on there.
And where'd you end up next?
In a place called Saqqara, and for anybody that just absolutely loves history and Egypt is one of those great places, but Saqqara is so cool because most archaeologists believe that the Saqqara pyramid is the oldest pyramid or pyramid-like structure in the world.
Pyramid-like structure. So it's not your typical pyramid.
Correct. And it's actually a stepped pyramid, and they're very similar to it's very similar to what you'll see oftentimes in Central and South America.
That's what I was about to ask you because I was thinking that that's what they use there,
Right.
and I didn't know. Is it similar?
And what happens is there was kind of an evolution in the burial process, and they started off with what was called a mastabas, which is kind of like the first level of that steeped pyramid, and then later on they added other levels at the same kind of angles, and that's what gave it that kind of stepped.
Okay, that makes sense. That's really cool. Now, is there, like you said, they think it's oldest? Any idea on the dating of that?
At least 5,000 years old. So
Wow.
so
That is incredible to me.
and to me, and we've traveled and we've seen some pretty old stuff.
Yeah.
And yet some of it, it's like, oh well, here is this, and when we look at the pyramids, it is 2,000 or 2,500 years older than a lot of the temples that we've seen, and
Wow.
in Rome and or Greece and places like
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah, that really throws it into perspective because, yeah, we have seen a lot of antiquity type things, and that's crazy. Yeah.
and so like I said, it's a step pyramid. You start off with the first level of the mastabas, and then it's the next level and the next level, and it goes up and up and up. And this particular pyramid, and again, there's an argument: is it a ziggurat? Is it a pyramid? Is it a pyramid-like structure? Well, it's called Dozier's Pyramid, and so Dozier is the guy that was originally buried there. All right, guys, this is the Pyramid of Dozier behind me. It's the oldest pyramid in Egypt. You can see that it's a step pyramid. Imhotep was the name of the architect. Later, he will actually be one of the few people in Egyptian mythology or real history that's going to be given the rank of a deity because of his brilliance. One of the things that's really interesting is that there's a guy named Imhotep, and Imhotep was viewed as the first architect, and he was the one that supposedly laid out the plans and built this.
Okay.
And so his mathematic formulas and things like that will be used in later, buildings of things, but they actually kind of improve on it every time. And he is one of the few characters in Egyptian mythology. Unlike in Greek mythology and Roman mythology, a lot of times people are deified. They're made into deity and all of that stuff. He is one of the few people in Egyptian mythology that was viewed to be deified and made a god because of his, his mathematical skills.
Okay. So they took real life and pulled it into mythology, and that's cool. I didn't know that.
Right. And so again, when you think they did that with like Julius Caesar and people, and yet, but when they did that was 2,500 years after this guy. So, he's kind of viewed as the first. And so that was just really, really interesting. Another thing that, and I only have a few pictures of this. This wasn't some of my better work because this was where I got caught in that sandstorm, and sand was in my eyes and everything. And I'm just trying to make.
So it makes photographing hard.
Every time I tried to open my mouth, I'd get a mouthful of sand, and it's just as unpleasant in Egypt as it is here. But there is a couple of pyramids. You look over, and they're kind of like wonky structures that kind of almost look like big piles of rock. and those were originally pyramids that a couple of things happened. Some just collapsed over time. But
Maybe because the technology
right,
wasn't there
right,
yet and it didn't hold up.
and and I think that, but then the oldest one was the one
Was the one that held up.
held up,
Yeah.
and so maybe people tried to come in and didn't do quite as good a
That's what I
job.
was about to say. Maybe it was the builder.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing that was so interesting and tragic also is that at different times a couple of things happen, that you would have another pharaoh, or you would have another, much later, other empires. They would come in and they needed to build, say, an aqueduct or a road, and they're like, hey, we got all this cut stones over here. So they would just go and dismantle these pyramids and make other stuff out of them. And so you could see that throughout Egypt, and there's one or two pictures.
Recycling's one thing, but don't steal someone's pyramid.
Well, and I didn't learn. I learned so much from this, but there was the Great Pyramids, the three that we talked about last week, in the late 1800s, to help build some dams and stuff. The guy that was the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire said, "Well, just tear all this down and do that." And
history.
Yeah, and so, but those kind of things did happen. So
Yeah. Which it's funny to me because the people who created all this stuff, I don't think viewed it as valuable as we view these pieces of history, because they were living in the moment, so they didn't,
right now
to them it was just another pyramid,
right, and they saw it as the burial place for their deity or for their god,
right,
and so it was important in that aspect, but
the actual structure, not so much.
But one of the things that is kind of cool, because they think about, like, I don't know if they made those things if they really thought 5,000 years from now people
would still be standing.
Yeah, and it is, it's just, like I said, I use the word amazing and incredible, and I need to look up some more words. But
how else do you describe
right,
it? This is, like you said, 5,000 years old. It's still standing today, and it's in beautiful shape.
Right.
How did someone with as little technology as they had at that time pull this off? How did they do that and create something that can withstand the test of time and withstand the weathering and things like that? Yet today, we can't create a building that will last even close to anything like that.
And you're talking about 5,000 years of history, multiple wars, sandstorms, earthquakes, all of those things. One of the things that was kind of cool, and it was another place that we were at, and my tour guide made a great point. He said, I said, well, man, that doesn't look like it's completed. What happened? He said, man, we learn more from stuff that we find that wasn't completed. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And he says, well, and we went around to the other side, and he said, do you see that looks like, all that mud stacked there, that big kind of hill? And he said, yeah. He says, what we realized is that they would, when they were building both the mastabas, the step pyramids, and then finally the Great Pyramids, that they would make basically mud brick ramps, and that was how they would get the things up. And then after it was all done, they would take the mud brick and basically water it down into mud again, and then move it, and then put the sheen and everything on it. So that was pretty cool.
That's very inventive.
Right.
Very, wow.
Yeah,
that's impressive.
Yeah, and it was one of those things, because people have always asked me, well, how do they? And I'm like, there's a lot of theory, but when you saw this, and again, this was a recent excavation within the last 20 years that kind of put light on that. So
wow, that's just amazing. Here you go. We have a tool. Now it's gone.
Right.
I love that. That's cool.
It's kind of like you think about when we build, these massive buildings. We have all the cranes and everything, and then we take them away, and there's a beautiful building.
Yeah. Wow, it's just incredible to me to think that long ago they thought of all this stuff. Right. You just don't picture that in your mind when you're thinking of ancient history.
Right.
You think of the more, the most basic of tools, the most basic of ideas, but they had so much forethought,
And they were talking about, and what you're realizing when you're talking about cutting limestone and things like that, you have other rock tools, and that's it. And they were talking to me, and they were showing us how they would actually basically drill these kind of holes in and put water in it and wait for the water to expand, and it would crack it kind of in a straight line. So there was a
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to babble about that nonstop, but it is
I
impressive.
think it's the art thing in me
Right,
goes, wait,
right,
architecture. This is
right,
so cool.
right.
How they built it and everything is amazing.
And you know what happens as we get newer and more modern, in Egypt. So as we go from this was kind of the first thing, but then later we'll see when we get to other temples and other places how much the architecture is, just everywhere.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things. And one of the other things at Saqqara that is so cool was, and this was, I was happy because I got out of the sandstorm, but we went down in a tomb, and it was a tomb of a guy named Fatah Hotep. Okay,
Okay.
and this guy was not a pharaoh, but I won't say he was a regular guy. He was a wealthy guy. He was the vizier. He was kind of would be like the Secretary of State or the
So
Prime
he had a
Minister.
title.
Right.
He just wasn't
He
in
wasn't
the upper rankings.
right. So basically, the vizier is the number two guy really the guy that does all the work. Kind of like a prime minister to a king, where the king
Right.
has a title in the bloodline. Um, but the coolest thing about him was when he died, he was wealthy. People knew who he was. They didn't go all out like a pyramid, but they made a tomb for him. And this tomb is largely intact. The carvings on the wall tell his life story,
Oh,
and
wow.
so yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah.
Guys, these are mastabas. These were basically tombs for nobles. They're a lot flatter. You see some pyramids over here that didn't end so well.
Wow. That's really cool that they went that far.
Right.
I mean, yes, like you said, he had a title, but he wasn't in the upper,
Right.
Echelon there. He
Right.
was, lower level, but yeah, they still went to that extent.
Right. And again, he had the money to have this done. And remember, all of these people, if you had money,
you could do a lot.
you were going to go all out. And even people that didn't have money, one of the things I learned there is they had, just like we do, funeral homes. And they had,
Really?
yeah, and they had basically mummification. They had this level where you could have these
You can buy
amenities.
this package.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what it was. And so, yeah, so those were all over.
Okay.
And he was wealthy enough to have the big package. And,
Yeah.
you'll see in some of the pictures, some of the color is still there. But again, we're talking about 5,000 year old.
Which is amazing. There's any color still there.
But the stonework, when you first go in, you see this kind of depiction of him and his son, and his son when he was a little boy. And there were two things that really stuck out to me, and one was that there were all these people coming in a procession, and they were all holding these ducks. And I'm like, being from Florida, I've got some friends that are crazy duck hunters. Yes,
Yes.
and there are Egyptian ducks here. Okay. And up a little bit further north of where we are, duck hunting is still a big deal in Egypt. And so 5,000 years ago, this guy loved duck hunting. And so his friends, to honor him, were bringing, these gifts to, again, he's dead, but to honor him to the afterlife, all of these ducks.
It's
And
a custom.
so you look at all of these pictures and you'll see it that they're holding these ducks and these swans by their head and all of this stuff and taking them to there.
All right, guys, I'm inside of a tomb of a nobleman in Saqqara, Egypt. Some pretty cool stuff here. There's some hieroglyphics on the wall. They're bringing gifts to the deceased person, and the gifts they're bringing are things like duck and lotus flowers and things of that nature. So it's pretty cool. This is a depiction of the man and his son.
That's just crazy, to think that they did that they would, sculpt that into the wall to honor him like that.
And one of the things that, when you look at different tombs, and we'll talk about this later when we get to King Tut's, some of them were just painted on, but these are actually sculpted into the wall, at half an inch, thick.
Yeah.
And, so that was cool. There was this deal about, the cattle that he owned and these people herding the cattle. And you could see the cows, and you could see.
It just amazes me that after this long, it's still there. Like you can still, like the relief,
Right.
it's amazing. I mean, with all that sand and the weathering and the earthquakes, like you said, that this is still standing and it's still intact, and you can still see the art that is in this.
And one of the cool things, because it is a tomb and it was protected from
protected,
that,
but you're not
but now
protected
people
from earthquakes
right
and things,
right
you know.
absolutely. And so when you looked in there, there was this one part that was really interesting, that there were all of these pictures, and there was some sign above it. And my tour guide, who again I can't say enough great things about him, he was a legitimate Egyptologist, and he said, "Oh, that means the number 10,000." So he says here that he has 10,000 goats, 10,000 this, 10,000 that, and he said probably didn't have any of that stuff, but he kind of padded the numbers.
Bragging rights,
Right. And and going back to that deal about the ducks and about the cattle and all of those things. Well, when you go to the Nile Delta, you still see people duck hunting. You still see people being cattle drivers, all in that area. So again, what they depicted 5,000 years ago
it's
still happening today, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
The other thing, and I made this point about this, is if you know me, I've been a wrestling coach and I love it. It's one of the greatest sports, the oldest sports in the world. And my tour guide said, so you start at the very top, and that was his younger days, and then you come down to kind of where he's at his midpoint of his life.
Mm-hmm.
But he says, look right up there, and I'm like, oh my God, man, he is wrestling. There are
wow.
these depictions of him as a young man wrestling, and there's this one where he's actually throwing the opponent over his head, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And so
yeah, you have to wonder, did he embellish that a little bit?
Yeah.
Was he really that great of a wrestler?
Well, I know I do. So I mean, I'm sure that human nature hasn't changed in 5,000 years, but so again, those were some of the cool things. Also, this guy, Fata Hotep, was often credited by many historians as writing the first ever book.
Oh, wow.
And as a vizier, one of the things you had to keep track of, how, everything from the weather to the production of grain to this and that. And, other people argue, well, it really wasn't him and it was a grandson. I'm like, dude, I don't care. Whoever did it.
Somebody in that family did it.
And so, whatever they were wanting to do 5,000 years ago, they actually made it happen because, myself and hundreds of people every day go in there and read about this guy's life. I mean, how cool is that? And again, he was an important guy, did a lot of things, but, he still enjoyed wrestling. He enjoyed,
he was a real person.
Right, real person.
And it's amazing to think that someone that is portrayed in the reliefs and things like that, that they were a real person. They did have this history. They did do these normal everyday things.
And that is kind of the biggest
the human side of it.
Right, and that's the biggest difference when you look at these mastabas and these viziers who weren't part of the kind of royal bloodline, because when you go in there and you see there's just almost always they're how great they are, and they've done all of these things, and they embellish that too as well, but and always depictions of the gods and the afterlife and them ruling. But hey man, this guy liked to duck hunt, this guy liked to wrestle, this guy was proud of his son, this guy was all of those things that 5,000 years later I could say kind of reminds me of me.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that. It just brings it all into perspective that we're all just people,
right?
And we all like similar things, and it's just part of human nature,
And as much as technology may change over the years, human nature, who we are, the things that we enjoy, the things we don't enjoy. It's so funny. Like I said, I have a good friend of mine that he talks about duck hunting 24/7. That's his greatest passion. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, man, if there was reincarnation, then
he would love it.
then Imhotep is probably my friend's reincarnated as that guy, because there were ducks all over this tomb. But that was really neat.
I love that. Yeah, it brings it all around and makes the world a much smaller place.
Right.
Travel does that. It's a great thing. Well, I think that's going to do it for today. Thanks for hanging out with us. We've enjoyed it. And we are planning something big coming up. We do have an adventure planned in just a few weeks.
Oh, yeah, we do. Okay,
yes,
yeah.
we do. So we're going to be keeping you guys posted on that. We've got more content coming up for you. And stay tuned. We've got more on Egypt and some other things we're going to be sharing with you guys. So hang out. Hit that subscribe button. Like and follow us on socials and on YouTube. And remember, break the monotony.
Not the bank.
Bye, guys.
Have a good night.